Hey guys, it's Bailey. Welcome back to the channel and thanks so much for tuning in. Today's video is going to be all about some palettes that I am tossing. I'm decluttering a couple of palettes. It's the hardest section of my collection to talk about decluttering, let alone actually declutter. I don't know why. Palettes are just near and dear to my heart. Like even more so than highlighters. They're just so satisfying to look at. The arrangement of colors, how they complement. I don't know. I could go on. Bottom line is this was not an easy choice, but I do have some reasoning as to why I'm getting rid of these. None of them are especially bad, which is, again, why it was hard. But I had to be a little cutthroat, so let's dive in. Alrighty, first up is from the brand Catrice. It is the Absolute Rose eyeshadow palette. This is just, I mean, it's super affordable. Catrice as a brand is very affordable, available maybe exclusively at Ulta, I want to say. But drugstore brands have really been stepping up their game, so while this is a nice palette, the color selection is a little uninspiring to me. There's so many other shadow palettes out there right now that have that mix of taupes and rosy tones, and this one doesn't offer a lot of contrast, or at least as much contrast as other palettes that are out there. So it really just isn't all that inspiring for me to pick up and go to town with. So it's gonna go. Next is the Lorac Unzipped Mountain Sunset. About a year ago, over under give or take, they launched 3 of these palettes, maybe 4, but I think 3 of these palettes. I have 2 of them, the Unzipped Mountain Sunset and the Unzipped Desert Sunset. Both of them are really underused. I had every intention of doing videos and wearing them all the time, and newer, shinier things came out and I just never came back around to them. But now that I have, I see that Unzipped Mountain in particular is just not my cup of tea as compared to the Desert Sunset, which is why I'm keeping this, because the shade, the range here is so similar. Yes, there's this pop of copper and then you get a mix of smoky and grays, but for the most part they are super similar shadows in here, and certainly none that I don't have elsewhere in my collection, which is why this just has to go for me, especially for as underutilized as it is. If there is a chance that I will use either of these sunset palettes, I know it'll more likely than not be this one, which, for reference, in case you want to see the inside, looks like this beautiful mix. See, you can just see between the two there's a higher contrast in shades between the Desert Sunset and the Mountain Sunset. There's just a few too many similar shades in here versus this with the deep purples and berries and bronzes and things like that. Speaking of, because this Desert Sunset reminds me of what is on my eyes, I do feel the need to clarify that I'm not wearing this palette on my eyes. This is actually a single shadow. I recently picked it up from my brand. One of you guys recommended it, from Beauty Bar Baby. It's an indie brand and it's the shade Hocus Pocus. It's supposed to be a quad chrome shade. So I'm currently testing this out. It's the only thing I am wearing on my eyes besides a CoverGirl eyeshadow primer, but that's it. Pretty sweet one and done eyeshadow look. The next palette wins the award for being the most ridiculously expensive eyeshadow palette I have. Not necessarily that I own, because the Natasha Denona star palette that I have is super expensive and I might have a couple of others that are up there in price. But in terms of what you get for what this costs, it's a little outrageous, and I've had it for forever, really have not used it all that much, so it's gotta go. It's from the brand Ray, and it doesn't even say what kind of palette this is on the back, but I think the premise behind the brand Ray is that they make long-lasting waterproof products, but again, I think brands are really stepping up their game with formulas that's not really that's kind of the standard now, right? I would expect my products to be long-wearing. There are some exceptions, like that's how you get a few duds, and it also depends on your body chemistry, how much oil you produce, how much you sweat. There are so many different variables, but this specifically is supposed to be a sweat-proof brand, I believe, or at least they used to be. And this is what you get in this palette. It is a massive bronzer, 2 blushes, 1 berry, 1 mauve, and 3 eyeshadows. A highlight, a mid-tone gold, and then a deep greeny bronze. It's a really pretty kind of greeny bronze. The whole palette itself is very pretty. It's just a little limiting in the looks you can do. It's a great one and done eyeshadow palette, but I'll annotate the price. I just remember when going through my collection and looking this up, because it wasn't really a brand or a palette I remembered, I was shocked at the price. So it's barely used, it'll go to a good home, but in terms of what's functional in my collection, what I reach for the most, this is just not it. And last, I'm actually gonna talk about 3 palettes. They are all from Smashbox: the Double Exposure palette, the Full Exposure palette, and the Shape Matters palette, which is an all matte palette. And it's not that these aren't good, I really liked them at the time that I had them, but since then Smashbox has launched a couple of new eyeshadow formulas in a couple of different formats, and I prefer all of them to these. And if you're still wanting a similar color palette to one of these, they have mini full exposure palettes. Actually, for comparison, here are the 2 side by side. And if you're gonna buy one, I would just as soon go for the smaller one, because I really think they chose the right colors to go in here to really maximize the number of looks that you'll get for as few shades there is in there. Because when you look At this one, there are a couple of it's a great go-to neutrals palette, but there are a couple in there that are just very, very similar. It's like you really can't tell the difference when you're actually applying them to the eye. So the mini version of this palette really condenses and simplifies everything you need into a much more compact and portable version. That is why I feel I can get rid of the full exposure. And then again, just the same with the double exposure. I have other formulas that I prefer from them, namely these cover shot palettes. This is the one that I just reviewed from the Vlada collaboration, but they sent me the whole collection of these cover shot palettes, and the formula is beautiful, as well as they also sent me the new photo edit eyeshadow trios, which again are just a more simplified version of something like the cover shot palette, although I can't confirm the formula is the same, but again, if you're just looking for a super simple trio, I much prefer the formula of these shadows to one of those in the exposure palettes. And then the last palette from Smashbox that I'm getting rid of was the all matte palette that they launched. And again, really liked this when I came out, but a lot of other brands have been coming out with similar palettes. They are more compact, less repeats in terms of shades in here. Speaking specifically to, it was so funny, these are side by side in my collection as I was combing through it. This Sonia Kashuk palette, more affordable, more condensed, looks almost identical in terms of shade range. So, and then there's also palettes like the Urban Decay Ultimate Naked Basics palette, I want to say. It has a super similar palette here, or color shade range as well. So in thinking about formulas that I prefer and shades that I already have, these were just 3 palettes that, although I love Smashbox, not my favorite formula from them, and not colors in my collection that I didn't feel like I already had a ton of. So that is it. 7 palettes that are out the door for me. I know it doesn't seem like a lot, especially given the number of palettes that I have, but it felt like a lot. It feels like real progress, guys, so I'm gonna take it where I can get it. Let me know if you enjoy these kinds of videos. Tell me down in the comments below, and tell me if you've been decluttering anything lately, specifically palettes, because that would be very gratifying, but really anything will do. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye, guys.